Hi, Ranger Max here. I'm in White Oak Park and I'm really excited to explore what lives in this stream with you. As a young person, one of my favorite things to do was to flip over rocks and to just be curious and excited about all the interesting life that lives underneath them. And as a Allegheny County Park Ranger, that's one of my favorite things to share with the community is the interest and curiosity of some of the tiny organisms that live under rocks and the importance of the health of our local waterways. And so join us today as we explore what lives in the stream. So an important thing to bear in mind before we get into the fun activity of checking out what lives in this waterway, always make sure that you check with an adult or guardian before you get into any water whatsoever. As you can see, this stream that I'm in is pretty shallow, and you don't have to be in a really large waterway to find interesting life. And notice also I'm wearing some waterproof boots. You always want to make sure that you're wearing closed-toed shoes when you're exploring any kind of stream or waterway like this. There could be sharp rocks, even some litter, glass, metal, other things. And no matter what, when we're in a stream, we always wear closed-toed shoes. So some old ratty sneakers, some rain boots like these would really keep your feet safe from injury. We also want to respect the wildlife and the habitat that we're exploring. So we have to remember each one of these rocks is the home for a lot of different animal life. And it's really important when we're flipping over these rocks to be mindful of the fact that we're peering into these animals' homes. So what we don't want to do is pick up rocks, scatter them around, leave them overturned upside down. And you want to find a rock that you want to check under, and you want to pick it up away from you. So pick up the far end and lift it up this way. You can carefully let the sediment wash downstream, and then you can go ahead and pick up the rock and take a look at what's living underneath. And I see some interesting things crawling around on here. And we'll talk about a little bit later how you can temporarily catch and observe some of these creatures. But it's really crucial when you're done observing the rock that you put it back right where you got it with the correct side facing down. Imagine this, you're at your home where you feel safe and you're enjoying some safe time with your family, and a giant creature rips the roof off of your house, looks down at your family inside, and then throws the roof in another direction. So I like to bear that in mind whenever I'm exploring a stream, to be really sensitive and respectful of the wildlife that lives here. So of course, flipping over rocks and just kind of looking at what's living under there is a really neat, low impact way to explore what lives in a stream. But another easier way to collect a larger number of these tiny macroinvertebrates is with a net. I have here a special kind of net. It's called a D-frame kick net. And instead of targeting individuals like those animals clinging under that rock, the way you use this net is you place it firmly against the substrate below on the bottom of the stream. And you want to be downstream of what's called a riffle. And I have an area here where the water's flowing over some rocks and there's some disturbance, some turbulence and bubbles. And those parts of the stream tend to have more dissolved oxygen in the water, and therefore we can find more diversity of life. And so we can place this net against the bottom of the stream, and then I'm going to stand upstream of the net, and I'm going to kind of scuff my feet around on the bottom of the stream. And what I'm doing is to try to loosen the grip that all these tiny animals have on the rocks, and maybe down even into some of the gravel. I can pick up a rock and I can kind of scrub it off in the water, making sure that all of that water is flowing into my net. And then once it all flows through, then we can pick up our net and observe all of the interesting things that live in that substrate. And boy, I got some really neat stuff here. We're gonna take a look at what I just caught in this net in just a moment. But that's a special net that you might not have at home. You can do that same technique with a simple strainer like this one. Just make sure that you put the strainer downstream of the area you want to collect. And you want to kind of scuff around the rocks a little bit. Get down in that gravel. You could have a friend help you. And wow, you can see there's lots of different life just from that short amount of scuffing I did. And so it doesn't take a lot of special tools in order to get a really interesting look at what lives in our streams. Okay, so we have collected a lot of really interesting aquatic macroinvertebrates, and we've carefully collected them with our nets. We have some different trays and this white tray to carefully separate out some of these animals so that we can take our time and observe them without them drying out or being subject to too much stress. And I just want to kind of go over with you what we found here in just a short amount of time in the stream. I'm going to be using this. This is it's called a dichotomous key to macroinvertebrate life. And you can download and print this from the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. This is a great tool. And how you use this, you use this to identify something that you're not sure about, and you don't have to know anything about the animal, and you go through a series of decisions. So our first decision is, does it have a shell or no shell, legs or no legs, and so on and so forth, until you're down to counting some of the tails, and that can really help you to identify what you've collected without having a lot of previous knowledge or experience. So first, I just kind of want to go over broadly what we found today. We found a lot of dragonfly larvae. So dragonflies, we know, like to fly around in the air, but part of their life cycle is a larva that actually lives in an aquatic environment, and they spend almost their entire life cycle in that aquatic larval state. So we'll take a look at those, see if we can identify those. We found some interesting crustaceans called scuds. They kind of look like little tiny shrimps, and we found a lot of those today. And we found some really interesting kind of squirmy worm-like fly larvae that we're going to identify. And we found some unique looking clusters of rocks clinging to the bottom side of this rock, and that is actually another fly whose larvae builds a tiny home for itself out of sand, gravel, and rocks. And before we try to identify some of these things, I just want to mention, if you do find any salamanders or amphibians, it's really important to be very careful with those. Try to avoid touching them with your bare hands. The oils on our hands can have a negative impact for those, and you want to make sure they're in an area where they can stay moist. So we carefully captured the salamander using this strainer, and we have it in here. It's in the water right now, but if it wanted to get out of the water, it could crawl up onto this rock. And we want to make sure when we set that salamander free, we take it right back to the area where we found it. So let's dive right into some identification. We're going to use our key, and I want to identify these larvae. I suspect that they're dragonfly larvae, but I'm not sure. So I'm going to work through the key. Has no shell, and it does have legs. Now I have to count the pairs of legs. So let me take a quick look, use my magnifying glass. I think I count 6 legs. So we have, the choices are 3 pairs of legs, 4 pairs of legs, or 10 plus legs. So I think I counted 6 legs, so we're going to go 3 pairs of legs. Wings or no wings. I don't see any obvious wings, so I'm all the way down here now, and now it's asking me to count the tails, and I'm counting 2 tails on these larvae. So this section is for 1 or 2 tails, and now I'm just going to go by the picture that looks like it matches. And so we have our options are caddisfly, alderfly, Dobson fly, stonefly nymph, or mayfly nymph. And some of these look like they could be 2 tails, that could be a mayfly nymph. Now, we would have to do some further exploration in a proper field guide to make a positive ID, but that can get us close enough to have an idea of what we're looking for. I suspected these were dragonfly larvae or dragonfly nymphs, but I see here dragonfly nymphs have no obvious tails, so I was mistaken, and they kind of look like dragonfly nymphs, but they're actually probably stoneflies or mayflies. Let's ID one of these other larvae here. And we can use forceps to manipulate these if we're very careful. And this one's kind of large, so I'm going to very carefully remove it. This is kind of looks like a big worm or a big grub. And if we work through our key, we can say no shell, no legs, and then we have worm-like or with tentacles, brushes, or tails. At first glance, this appears to be worm-like, but if you look at the rear end, the posterior end, it kind of has some hooks, some kind of bristly shaped hooks. And it looks a lot like this picture, which is a cranefly larva, large gray with tentacles. And that's exactly what this is. A cranefly larva. I'm going to put it back here in the water so that we can watch it kind of undulate and move around. And I happen to know that the animals that made these little stone houses are caddisflies, but we can't see them because they're inside that little stone house, and so we can't use this tool because we can't count the legs or the tails. So in order to do so, we'd have to leave these submerged in some water and wait for them to emerge. And we may actually have to take apart their house that they built, and I don't want to do that today. So we'll have to just observe those as they are here. Okay, so we've had some time with these aquatic macroinvertebrates, and we really want to make sure that we get them back to their habitat. We don't want to keep them in the sun where they can get too warm, and they really don't like to be in still water. So just like we talked about, we want to put everything back as carefully and thoughtfully as we can. So this rock that has the caddisfly cases under it, we want to make sure we put those cases facing down carefully in the stream. We have our different fly nymphs and larvae. We just want to get those back into the stream water where they can crawl under a new rock. I'll take all of these dishes out of here. And we have sort of everybody else. Oop, a cranefly larva got out. And so we just want to give these animals an opportunity to get back to what they were doing before we came in to observe them. It's really important that we don't keep these animals out of their environment for too long. And they really don't like to live in a home aquarium or that kind of environment. They like cold flowing water that's rich in oxygen. And some of these animals that we found today are tolerant of certain pollution, like scuds. They don't really mind so much polluted water, but other animals we found today, like the caddisflies and the salamanders, really are intolerant of pollution. So based on what we found living in this stream today, we can say that this water is relatively clean and of relatively high quality. And so by taking a look at what lives in a waterway in your neighborhood, you might be able to start to tell what the water quality is like and how polluted or not polluted the water may be. And always remember to be careful with pollution and really think about these animals in the streams when it comes to polluting our waterways. Everybody needs to do their part to keep our streams and waterways healthy. And before we leave, we're just going to make sure we pick up everything that we brought with us. And also, I'm going to check this area for litter, and I'm going to take that out with me as well. We always want to make sure we leave the area better than we found it. Thanks for joining us to take a look at what lives in the stream today. We look forward to having fun with you next time.